Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to this video in which I'm going to kind of wrap up the end of Nonfiction November by talking about the last 3 nonfiction books I read in November, and then also talk about one fiction book that I read as a part of a kind of a group read that I've really been enjoying. So let me talk about the nonfiction books I've read first. The first nonfiction book I finished here in the last couple of weeks of the month is called A River of Books, A Life in Reading by Donna Seaman. Donna Seaman is an editor for Booklist and has written and been involved in the literary world for quite some time. This book is kind of a memoir of her reading life and how books have affected her life. I found parts to be really compelling. One of the chapters is called The River Styx, which involves her reading and a tragedy which happened in her family. It's not always, I think, as effective or affecting as it could be, as is true with all memoirs. There were times where I thought, this person's life's not necessarily that much different or that much more interesting than anybody else's, but her love of books and her relationship with books really comes through. And as a book person myself, that's something I find compelling, something I find interesting, something that made the book worth reading. And it's not very long; it's only a couple of hundred pages. And so, I thought it was an enjoyable read, if not a great read. Next on my list was one of the big nonfiction books I wanted to read this month, and that was Henry V by Dan Jones. This is my first book by Dan Jones that I've ever picked up or attempted to read, as far as I know. I was talking to my sister over the Thanksgiving holidays, and she's actually read 2 other books by Dan Jones, and she just so happened to be reading Henry V at the same time as I was, so that was nice. My sister and I don't oftentimes read the same books, but she read The Plantagenets, and I can't remember what the other one of the Dan Jones books she'd read, but she really enjoyed them. And I have to say, I enjoyed Dan Jones' biography of English King Henry V a tremendous amount as well. Jones has a really interesting, easy to read, easy to digestible, occasionally arch, sometimes funny, not ha-ha funny, but wow, that's a cool juxtaposition of words or ideas that really, I thought, it brought Henry V's life to light. One of the things I thought was interesting about Henry V is, if you don't know, Henry V is my favorite Shakespeare play, in part because of the great speeches that Henry V gives in that play, or that Shakespeare writes for him. And I like the fact that Jones doesn't ignore Henry V, the play, or any of those things having to do with Henry V, and tries to present us a life of Henry V as somebody who was active, who's somebody that for a long time was considered to be the greatest king in the history of England, and maybe that's true, famous for winning the Battle of Agincourt and for conquering or reconquering a lot of Normandy, which the English kings claimed at one time, was successful enough in his wars in France to be declared the regent of France, and his son to be considered the heir of France, before he died kind of unexpectedly of disease at the age of 36. I think Jones does a great job of presenting Henry as a calculating and effective politician, as a hard-nosed and effective military leader. At the same time, he doesn't shy away from the man's cruelty, his almost monomaniacal fixation on the idea that God wanted him to restore, Plantagenet rule of France. Hello.
I could use some help.
Okay. One of the things I think is important is that we judge people by the time period in which they live. That may come as a surprise to some of you, giving my takes on people like Thomas Jefferson. But with Henry V, a lot of the acts of cruelty and violence that he carried out, in many cases just mind-numbingly horrific things that he inflicted on other people, that he witnessed, that he participated in, that he carried out, is to keep in mind the times in which he lived. It was a time of incredible cruelty, in which people were brutally executed and murdered in all kinds of just unbelievable ways for their religious beliefs or the political actions they took, or for mistakes that they just happened to make. And Henry V definitely participated in those. But while keeping in mind, I think the time period in which he lived and the things he might have been subjected to if he'd been captured, or things had gone differently for him, it's also important, I think, to look for examples of people in the lives of these people in the past who were living differently or who urged him to do different things. And there were times in which Henry carries out these acts of cruelty, even though people quite close to him are asking him not to. And I think it's important that that Jones includes those things to give us a complete picture of the man. All that said, historically, there's no doubt that Henry V is one of the most important kings in the history of England in terms of what he was able to carry out, in terms of what he was able to accomplish, that he wanted to accomplish, and that his death at the age of 36 of disease kind of left England in an awkward position for some period of time until his essentially infant son could grow up and take control of England. But a really good work of popular history, which I enjoyed a great deal. And the book I was looking forward to most all month was John Lewis, A Life by David Greenberg, a biography of one of my heroes and one of the great civil rights leaders of the 1960s and politicians of the 80s, and that's John Lewis. If you can think of a civil rights event which you learned about when you were in your high school class, assuming that you did, John Lewis was there. Sit-ins at lunch counters, John Lewis did that. Freedom rides, trying to integrate bus stops, John Lewis did that. Birmingham, Lewis was there. March on Washington, Lewis gave a speech. Crossing the bridge at Selma, Lewis was there. So there's a tremendous amount of American civil rights history that Lewis was a part of, and is a part of at a very young age. He was only 23 in 1963 when he gave a speech at the March on Washington. And one of the things I think is most remarkable that comes through in Greenberg's biography is that Lewis's commitment to nonviolence never flagged, never failed. He never committed an act of violence. He was never a part of any kind of violent protest, and yet he was quite frequently the victim of violence, so much so that his life was in danger. When the civil rights movement came to an end, he kind of floundered for a little while looking for something to do, worked for the government, got elected to local government in Atlanta, ran for Congress, became United States Congressman, and was involved in politics on the United States level as a member of the House of Representatives from the mid-'80s all the way up until his death relatively recently. He was a congressman from Atlanta, Georgia, and therefore I think a really important and influential person even after the civil rights movement was over. And this book was highly readable, really enjoyable, straightforward biography. I will say that in reading it, you can feel, I think, the points of tension in which Greenberg, might be wanting to imply sometimes some hypocrisy, sometimes some perhaps not completely honorable dealings on the part of John Lewis, particularly as it involves his run for office or his endorsements of presidential candidates, etc., while he was in office. And he definitely struggled with those and then came to a decision and stuck by that decision once it had been made. Probably most uncomfortably in the 2012 election year, Lewis had endorsed Hillary Clinton, and then he changed his endorsement to Barack Obama. That was a decision that was very difficult for him in his run for the open seat in his district for Congress. He went up against one of his good friends, Julian Bond, and that became a fairly bitter election campaign, which, Lewis came out on top of. So, an advocate of nonviolence, but he could be a hard-nosed politician. I think Greenberg sometimes pulls his punches a little bit here to keep, the idea that Lewis was a hero, a very virtuous person, all of which are true. But I don't think we need to maintain those ideas about Lewis to the point where he comes off as a saint, and Greenberg comes close to that. So, I think he flirts with that idea of hagiography a little bit here from time to time, but otherwise I think it's a very straightforward, very good, highly readable biography of John Lewis. So those were the works of nonfiction I read. I also joined the Pineiro Project, the other participants in our list below, which is a group of people who are attempting to read the works of Argentinian, primarily crime writer Claudia Pinero. And this month I read All Yours, which I found to be really entertaining, and it really was very well written. And if you've read Elena Knows, which is probably the book by Piñeiro that most people on BookTube, or most likely, or people on BookTube are most likely have heard of, you know that Pineiro is a good writer and has a really good translator, because she's able to write things and to make them seem real, and to really, I think, understand how these things work in really direct ways. In All Yours, we are really involved with the main character, a woman named Inez, who is married to a man named Ernesto, and they have a daughter named Lali. And in the book, Inez essentially is caught up in all kinds of problems caused by Ernesto's infidelity. I don't want to give too much away, because there is certainly a mysterious element to the book. But one of the things I think is the subtext, or the background text of the story, is that Inez finds herself living, and Lali, her daughter, find themselves living in a really patriarchal system. And so, in Argentina. And so the patriarchy there is, I think, one of the subjects of the book, and how the patriarchy essentially perhaps drives a woman like Inez crazy, and forgives the actions of her husband, and confines the possibilities for her daughter. And a lot of that's kind of the subtext. So it seems like there's this really powerful political message, and I know a lot of people shy away from that, but it's also an incredibly entertaining character study. And you could ignore all the subtext that I just talked about, or think is there. Maybe I'm making it up. What the heck do I know? But it's also a really interesting mystery with Inez, an incredibly interesting character who I just found to be fascinating. And the story of what she does and how she rationalizes it is, I just think, really great. It made a really good book. I think I actually like this more than Elena Knows. Not necessarily as a piece of writing, but as a story. Anyway, there you go. There's my wrap up for November, the end of nonfiction November, and my joining the Pineiro Project. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to be reading in December. As I said in the intro, one of my favorite things about December is I just read whatever I want to, fiction, nonfiction, any kind of genre I want. One of the books I intended to get to in November was Fire Exit by Morgan Talty. I do want to get to that, and that will be one of my priorities. Also, in the Pineiro Project, we'll be reading Time of Flies here at the beginning of December. So I'm going to be starting that book probably tomorrow. So that's 2. And then I bought some books not long ago. The books I'd intended to read for a long period of time are books that I avoided because I didn't think I liked the author. I have a couple of those books that I might pull off shelves and read, and we'll kind of see where else things go in December. But no really strong plans for December. Anyway, look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.